Okay, you're going to love this. How your attachment style plays out in adult, especially romantic relationships. And, sometimes people are a little uncomfortable when they hear about this coming because they're afraid, what if I'm not a securely bonded person? What if I wasn't a securely bonded child? And this is something that you carry with you through the rest of your life. This is how you know how to attach your bond to somebody. You don't know another way of doing so. Okay? You might think, oh no, what if I'm one of those insecure two styles? And does that mean that, I'm not capable of having um, a quality partnership or marriage in my life? And that's not true at all. Okay. In fact, almost half of people are not securely bonded. So let's take a look at this. Hazen and Shaver are the ones who really looked at this with adult relationships. Okay. And publish this work. And the first thing that will put you at ease if you tend to think that you may not be a securely bonded person is that we don't see any differences in relationships until there are troubled times. And then the difference comes in how people react to those troubled times. Okay, that's it. So let's look at those reactions. If you think about it, the default that has been built with a securely bonded baby and holds throughout your life is a default of trust. Wow, this stuff is really tying in now, right? It's tying in with Erickson, um, for instance. But anyway, remember that very first stage, 0 to 1, trust versus mistrust. First thing you learn, right? So this is a default in life for securely bonded individuals is trusting. So when there are troubled times, I want you to imagine, let's say that somebody who's securely bonded, they hear a rumor that their partner, spouse in life, has been cheating on them. Okay? Well, I'll tell you something. With a securely bonded person, they're not going to get upset because they're not going to think it's true, right? Their default is trusting. And, they'll likely mention it. They might even mention it as a joke, and talk about hearing this rumor, but it's not going to feel to the other person like a confrontation, right? Because their default is trusting. In fact, like I said, they might be thinking this is just hilarious and laughing when they tell the other person about it. Um, Very, very different with an anxious, ambivalent person. Okay, because the default is distrust. The default is to be afraid that it could be true. Okay, so the anxious, ambivalent is going to tend to be a little clingy, not want to let that person out of their sight. Okay, and sometimes it can even go to extremes. So, let's say that you have to work and you can't be by their side all the time, right? um, is they might even hire, a private detective, for instance. But less likely that they're going to talk about it. Why would they want to avoid talking about it with their partner? And you might, if you're thinking they're afraid the partner will leave if they do, might get angry and leave. That's often the case. So if they do bring it up, they're frightened. Hey, but sometimes they're so frightened that they don't bring it up at all. But either way, they don't tend to want to let that person out of their sight. They get a bit clingy. And then avoidant, hey, avoidant reacts to this with distance. And it might be physical distance, but it might be psychological distance, or it might be both, right? So remember that the default is distrust, to be afraid this is really true. But the type of overly independent thinking process that we see here is something like this. They think it's true. They have a tendency to think it's true. And so they think to themselves something like this. I guess I loved you too much. I better either leave or start loving you less so that I am not hurt like this in the future. So this is where you see them either leaving or being emotionally unavailable, creating psychological distance. So it might be, oh, we all know what this is like, right? You say, what's wrong? And they go, nothing. It might be something like that, or it might even be the silent treatment where you're like, what's up? What did I do wrong? Right? But, the important thing here again is that all three different styles of individuals can have very rewarding relationships in life. Okay, um, but here's the deal. If for one thing, you might have noticed and be wondering, why didn't we have a questionnaire about this? Why aren't we assessing ourselves on this in this class? Well, most of you know by now which style you are, right? We have a tendency, not so much when we hear about the baby pattern, because we don't have memory from then, but when we hear about this adult reaction to problems, troubled times in the relationship, we know who we are. Okay. And here's the deal, if you're not a securely bonded individual, um, that, one of the things is that knowledge is power. And if you recognize one of these behavior patterns as reactions to troubled times, that you have a tendency to get clingy, or you have a tendency to create psychological distance or physical distance, or both, you can do something about it once, because now it's been brought up into your consciousness. Remember all that from the psychodynamic approach? Very true. Once it's up in there, you can do something about it. It empowers you, takes you all the way to the humanistic approach with empowerment. Okay? But here's the deal. Your default is always going to be to act in this way on the slide. But you can override that with effort, right? So if you say, okay, I want these bad times to be a trigger to me, the minute I start thinking that my partner or spouse did something that I don't know for sure they did, that will be my trigger, okay? And instead of getting distant or getting clingy, I am going to try to remain calm and to talk to them, to use this open communication style. In other words, that's very different than confronting or accusing, right? It's just talking to them about it, okay? But that's not your default. So understand that if you miss a trigger and you're highly emotional and you kind of go off, you're going to go right back into this behavior pattern. Don't worry about it. Try for better next time. Okay. And if you're securely bonded, okay, there's a 50% chance in life that you're going to end up with, approximately 50% chance that you're going to end up with a partner that is not. And the important thing here is to understand your partner and understand their bonding style. Pick up on that. Now that you have the education under your belt, you can figure it out. And once you figure it out, when they do react this way, you're going to be, because you know about it, you're going to have a tendency to be less offended, to have your feelings hurt less, okay? And to be more patient with them. All right. Pretty cool stuff though, right? Okay, androgyny. Androgyny. So when we talk about androgyny, first off, we need you to know about communal traits and skills and agentic traits and skills and what they are. Okay, so it's two different kinds of sets of traits and skills. And communal skills, unfortunately, are oftentimes associated with the feminine stereotype. Okay, like only women could possibly be nurturing and compassionate and empathetic and have good negotiation skills and be really tactful. Okay, those are all communal skills. And agentic traits and skills, unfortunately, are often thought of as a masculine stereotype. Hey, as if only men could be self-assured and confident and have leadership skills, leadership skills, um, that kind of thing. Okay, and they're both great traits and skill sets to have, right? But I'll tell you something. This stereotype was so deeply embedded in our culture in the United States that until more recently, this was actually being measured in a dependent way. So when it was measured, your final score at the end would be somewhere between 1 and 7. Okay? And so looking at the scale, tell me this. If somebody had super high communal skills and super low agentic skills, what would their score be around? And if you're thinking of 1, you are right. Okay, so that means if they had really high agentic skills and really low communal skills, their score would be 7. But tell me this, what if they were medium? Yeah, what if they were low on both? What if they were really low on both sets of skills? Some people are. Okay, what would their score be? And if you're thinking it would be a 4, no, that's medium at both sets of skills. Okay? And what about if they're high on both sets? What would their score be? There's no way, right, to score high on both sets because they've been set up dependent from each other, dependent on each other. They've been set up in the actual measurement to be dependent on each other. And a researcher by the name of Bem was the first one to point this out. Okay, to unveil this, to bring it to people's consciousness, and to create an independent measure. So when you are completely done with Bem's scale, okay, you can end up in one of 4 different categories. So it's broken up in 4 different categories, but you see it's high and low, right? So you can be high on communal and low on agentic, or you can be high on communal. I'm sorry, this one, top one, that's a typo. And we're going to go right in there and fix that. So that masculine sex type is high on agentic, of course, and low on communal. The opposite for feminine sex typed. And then we've got androgynous, which is high on both sets of skills. And then we have undifferentiated, which is low on both. And I like that they put masculine sex typed, right, and feminine sex type, because anybody who knows anything about the theater knows that being typecast is a bad thing. It's very limiting, right? So some actors, for instance, who start out in comedies can never do a serious role because they've made it big and people associate them with the comedies, and they try to be serious, and people still tend to see a smirk on their face and think they're joking. But it's a very limiting thing, and that is the point they wanted to get across when they named these masculine sex typed, feminine sex typed. And then androgynous, meaning high on both sets of skills and undifferentiated, low on both sets. Okay. So now let's look at some androgyny research. Okay. And the thing is, a lot more people are trying now. A lot more people in younger generations, younger than my parents, certainly younger than yours, are really making an effort to develop both sets of skills now that all this research has pointed to all these advantages in life. Hey, and sometimes even in the way they look, as we see on this slide, examples of. But anyway, let's look at the research. So with first impression studies, researchers provided hypothetical descriptions of men and women of each of the 4 types. Okay? Androgynous men and women were liked more than their counterparts. So when that description was written up in an androgynous way, people like them more than the other three styles, okay? All three of the other types of styles. Not only did they like them more, but the participants in the studies judged them as more interesting and more intelligent. Okay, that's first impression studies. Then there's actual dyadic interactions. Okay, remember what people used to think with the stereotype is that a feminine sex-typed female would best end up being married to a masculine sex-typed male, right? That this would be the ideal, the best relationship to be in. And what they did was they paired individuals up of the different styles, and they found out that the pair of one agentic and one communal, in other words, one feminine sex typed and one masculine sex typed, got along the worst of any of these other possibilities. And they also liked each other the least. Pretty ironic, huh? Okay. And then when they look at relationship satisfaction studies, they actually looked at real relationships, real married people, okay, and that had been married about the same length of time. And they had them report their marital satisfaction, and they found that the highest marital satisfaction was reported by, and you think that I'm going to say, if individuals that were both androgynous, right? Not true. The highest marital satisfaction was reported by each person in a relationship with an androgynous person. Okay, so the joy comes to being with somebody who is androgynous, and so not necessarily a joy that's shared by both people in a couple. Pretty interesting stuff. And this brings us now to questionnaire number 10. Take out your self-assessment sheet. And the name for questionnaire number 10, the title you can write in now, is Androgyny. You tested yourself on androgyny. So what we're looking at here is your agentic skills separately first, and then your communal skills. Okay, because we can break that down even further, not just high and low, but high, medium, and low. And so the best way to look at this is to look at these separately. Your A score is your agentic skills score. So you have an A score and a B score. And your A score, if it's low, if you have low agentic skills, you've scored somewhere between 10 and 30. If you're medium on agentic skills and traits, then you're somewhere between, you scored between 31 and 49. And then if you're high on these skills, 50 to 70. And the same is true for B, or communal skills. So 10 to 30 is low, 31 to 49 is medium, and 50 to 70 is high. And if you scored high on both of these, congratulations, you are androgynous. Now, your homework. So don't forget your homework. You've got 2 chapters now to read for the cognitive approach. This is our last of our 6 approaches, by the way. And before that, of course, you have a test. So you're going to want to take your test, study for your test, take your test, and then before starting the cognitive lecture segments, okay, read your 2 chapters and do your last 2 questionnaires. It should be questionnaire 11 and questionnaire 12. And we will interpret those when we come back and join each other for the cognitive approach. And I wish you the best of luck on your test. I want you to knock my socks off.